All right, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, give me a second. So my name is Sasha. I'm the Prime Minister for today, and my preferred gender pronouns are she, her. So without further ado, I would like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Here on site government, we strongly believe that single-sex schools are more likely to bring a lot more disadvantages, and secondly, a lot more harm to these students, whether boys or girls, in our society today. We also believe that it is everybody's priority, whether the students, whether the teachers, whether the parents, everybody's priority is to give these students the best possible education. And that is why my on-site government is going to prove to you how we're going to get, first of all, we're going to equip these students with much higher level or much better education. And second of all, we're going to prove to you that these students are going to be much happier at the end of the day. And second of all, we're also going to prove that we're not just looking at things, we're not just looking at advantages for things or for the students' life in the short run, but we're looking towards the long run, where we want these students to have skills, to have knowledge, to be able to cope or be able to thrive in a society that is somewhat patriarchal. And I will touch a lot more on this in my argument later. So who are the main stakeholders that site government wants to prioritize in our debate today? Our main priority goes to these students who are currently in single-sex schools, because we see that they are facing problems, and we see that they're going to face a lot more problems in the future as well if we do not abolish these single-sex schools. So what are we willing to trade off? Of course, SAT government is ever so willing to trade off single-sex schools. And of course, I'm going to explain why exactly when I touch on my argument later on. And at the end of the day, what do we want to see? What is the outcome that we want to see? We want to see both boys and girls be able to strive in a society that is evolving so quickly, when not only in their schooling phase of life, but also when that phase is over, because we're going to see them acquire better education plus better skills. This includes social skills. It also includes things like self-esteem, and I'll touch on this in my argument. So what is site government willing to do? We are willing to abolish these same-sex schools. So what are we willing to do to these schools that have both the genders? We're willing to make it a safer place for both genders. And my DPM will later touch on exactly how we're going to do this. So first of all, what is my first argument? That single-sex schools are more likely to promote things like gender discrimination and also gender stereotyping. So why is this true? First of all, site opposition needs to understand that what is happening right now is dividing students into two groups, girls and boys, and putting them in a school where, and the school is a place where a student goes 5 days a week, which is why it's important to realize that they're only being exposed to people of the same gender. So why is it important that we care about this in the first place? First of all, like what site government has already mentioned, we said that we want to prioritize these students' benefit for the long run. And site opposition needs to see that we still live in a society that is patriarchal, and there are a lot of unconscious biases that are affecting both women and boys as well, which is why state government thinks that by exposing these students to both both genders from a young age itself, which is at school, of course, they're more likely going to be able to understand each other, because when we have things like assignments or things like group projects, etc., we're going to see they be able to respect and communicate with each other well. And yes, I accept your POI.
All right. Does government concede to the fact that co-ed schools now are already getting gender biasness from how society is like? So how do you deal with this in your world?
Okay, in our world, while we actually expose these kids, as you mentioned, it is still something that is happening in co-ed schools as well. However, in our world, it is less likely going to happen because there are things that we can do, there are alternatives that we can take in order to reduce this. And my DPM will later on touch on this in her argument. So now, why exactly is this detrimental to the development of these students? Because on-site opposition, peer pressure is going to be a lot higher. And yes, SAT government already knows and accepts the fact that competition already exists, and competition, it is crucial to have some sort of competition in order to get these students to, build things like courage or confidence. However, we see that the situation is not as bad in our world because when you are exposed to people of the same gender all the time, you're going to compare yourself a lot more because you're exposed to only the one gender as a student. And students are naive. Students, they don't think about, they don't have the mind to think too much or think about what they want to do. And we see that in opposition's world, this will later lead to a lot more other problems like suicidal thoughts, depression, etc., that we're already seeing in our world today. So now, what is the best case scenario and the worst case scenario? The best case scenario that we see in our world is that, of course, when we abolish these schools, as I mentioned, there's going to be less gender stereotyping and there's going to be a lot less biases, and these students are less likely going to be comparing themselves. Even if it means it happens, it's going to happen in co-ed schools, it is going to happen less in co-ed schools because they're going to be able to still respect themselves, and they're still going to be comparing themselves less. And other than that, we have also told you that they aren't going to be prepared for the later on world. Because as I mentioned, we still live in a patriarchal society where sometimes in businesses or in companies, we see that men are dominant, which is why we think it is crucial and extremely important to prepare these students from a young age, whether boys or girls, to be able to build the courage and confidence to walk up to each other, to speak to each other, or to have better communication skills with each other, and even respect each other as their own gender itself. So as we see on opposition side, where these are less likely going to happen. And an example I can give you is that we've seen in our world, we see that in co-ed schools, although this is happening, it is going to be less likely. It is less likely going to happen. So with that being said, I'll end my speech.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the fine speech. Now, to open up the case from our opposition bench, I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Here you are.
All right. Hi, my name is Angelina. I'll be the LO for this debate. My preferred gender pronouns are she, her, and preferred POI method is if you could just unmute yourself and ask, because I will not be checking the chat very often. So starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, understand that what side government is trying to ignore is they're trying to ignore the fact that when you put if you put girls in co-ed schools, this is where gender biasness does not suddenly just disappear like that. Because when you are mixed with boys, this brings more male dominance, as there's already a gender stereotype that is happening in society, and government does nothing to fix that. Okay, so first, some rebuttals against the Prime Minister. So first thing she said was how parents want to provide the best possible education, and how they want boys and girls to strive in the future and help them in terms of self-esteem and social skills. But panel, understand that when the problem with co-ed school is when you put girls in co-ed schools, you see how there's this unconscious biasness that are brought up by the teachers there, or there's this unconscious biasness that prioritize male dominance in these schools, and you see parents having this sexist mindset of prioritizing boys. This is why we tell you that if governments if government's end goal is they want boys and girls to strive in the future, this means that they would have to eliminate the gender biasness that is happening in society. But yet we tell you that they have had no solution in solving this. As when we talk about feminist movement, when we talk about us being the feminist movement and us wanting women empowerment, we mean we want to see women strive, but it is unlikely they're going to get it in co-ed school, and I'll tell you why later. Second, what government is trying to tell you is how single-sex students, single-sex schools has a problem where they are only interacting with their own gender, and where how government can prevent these gender biases from happening because you're mixing with girls and boys. Again, panel, we tell you that with single-sex schools, especially girls single-sex schools, because we as the feminist movement are prioritizing girls single-sex schools, we see that now there is actually a platform where girls are able to get position in power, where girls are able to become the class monitor of their class instead of going to co-ed school and it being male dominated with position in power and leadership roles. This shows you how that in single-sex schools, girls are actually able to get women empowerment from this, right? So let me just jump into my case. So the stance coming out from opposition side is we believe that single-sex schools provide a platform for empowerment for young girls. The burden we're trying to prove today is to prove how the comparative of co-ed school and single-sex school is far worse when it comes to co-ed school, because there's literally little to no women empowerment in there. And the second thing we need to prove is we need to prove why single-sex schools allows empowerment to happen and start from a young age. The end goal that we're trying to achieve is we want to see single-sex schools acting as a platform or acting as a environment to empower these young girls to succeed in life. A few characterizations that needs to come out in this debate that government has not provided. So what is the incentive of the feminist movement? The incentive of the feminist movement is to achieve equality and obviously give women empowerment in the aspects, especially when it comes to women holding powers in position and leadership roles. This is the incentive of the feminist movement. Now, what does girls look like in co-ed school? It looks like girls going to co-ed schools and the school being male dominated because teachers just think that men are better, and there's this unconscious biasness that's put in co-ed schools because of how society is running and how society is built. It also comes from parents being sexist and obviously prioritizing how men are just much more better because girls are too emotional, and obviously that is wrong because it is a biased stereotype. Now, what does single-sex schools look like? It looks like these external factors, i.e. unconscious biasness that comes from society and how they are pressuring girls to think that men are just better in general. But we tell you that single-sex schools act as a platform or an environment for girls to thrive, as now it will all the people in position and all the position in power and leadership roles are now dominated by girls. So girls actually have a sense of what it's like to be a position in power in these schools, and that government cannot concede they'll get from co-ed schools. Now, one thing that government might tell you is how they'll most likely get cultural shock. We tell you it is not likely that these girls are going to get culture shock in the future, because we tell you that they're still going to get male interaction from their family, or just male interaction from extracurriculars. But what opposition is trying to prioritize is we're trying to prioritize giving these girls empowerment and confidence to believe that they can hold these leadership roles from young. So my first point being why single-sex schools is just far more better than co-ed school. First of all, we tell you that we prioritize young girls from a young age going into co-ed school, because there's this unconscious biasness that is just put out in society, and this is the unconscious biasness that you face in co-ed schools where you go to school with boys and have boys teacher, and this obviously leads to the position in power, and the position in power being male dominated, because that's just how society is built, where male are just a better leader than women, and obviously there is no empowerment for women in these co-ed schools, and obviously these gender stereotypes will continue to happen, and women will just end up thinking that men are better when it's obviously false, right? Now, why is it important to note this panel is that in single-sex schools, it looks like girls dominating leadership roles and them knowing that they can become a higher position in society, because it's already ingrained in their mind from young that when you suck, that it's already ingrained in their mind that they can become they can become like CEOs of companies because they have had that like mindset of being in position, in empowerment. I mean, in power and having leadership roles. So we tell you when they succeed and when they go into the real world, there's obviously going to be more confidence to strive. As when you taste success, you obviously want more. So what is the comparison here? The problem in co-ed school is girls are unable to thrive and succeed as they don't have a platform, as they are being shunned down by their school because societies will stay biased against women and there's literally no change. But on opposition side, we provide a better platform for these women to thrive and get higher positions in school, therefore going out into the real world and go against men because now they have the confidence that like government cannot have. So we more likely break these like gender stereotypes on our world, and we have a better chance of making life better for women in general in society. So what is the best case scenario here? The best case scenario on opposition side is we tell you that we actually get to break these gender stereotypes, and it's already going to be most likely to happen as we now have a platform that's provided for them. But on the worst case scenario where gender stereotypes will still continue, which is very unlikely to happen, we tell you that it's fine because there is at least a platform for these women to voice out their opinions in school. Never been prouder to oppose.
I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for the fine speech. Now, to continue with the case from government, Deputy Prime Minister, here.
Am I audible?
Here you are.
Okay, so I'm Apita, and my preferred gender pronouns is she, her, and you can ask POIs verbally. And I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So my PM has mentioned how abolishing single-sex school is better, and why should people abolish single-sex school? So I'm gonna talk about how these genders are more exposed to other genders. For example, girls, they are exposed to working with males, and they would be open-minded, and how they would think of males, and how they would be knowledgeable on males and stuff like that. So firstly, I'm going to talk about how in single-sex school, people are not exposed to the opposite gender. For example, example that my PM has given is working in teams, right? In single-sex school, obviously you're going to work with males or females, right? But in co-ed school, we're going to work with different genders, and the teachers would also prefer and ask students to work with different genders, right? So in this way, people are exposed to how to work with different genders, and they know how to work with different genders. Where in single-sex school, when they work in teams with the same genders, they would not have more knowledge about it. And by abolishing single-sex school, like I said, they'll have more exposure, and they would have open-minded thinking. When I'll explain on why I said open-minded thinking shortly, and we're going to talk about how currently people are fighting for rights, right? For gender equality and feminism and things like that by making campaigns and protesting and yeah. So I'm going to talk about how co-ed schools do bring equality in gender, and do bring equality in gender. Like I said, by working with different genders, you're gonna have open-minded thinking. For example, people are knowing on how to work with different gender. They are exposed to knowing how to work with different genders. And in this way, this is obviously, it does bring equality. And secondly, by communicating with them, they would not feel weird, I would say. Like in single sex school, you're so used to speaking with the same gender, whereas when you go out and talk to a male, you would feel weird. You would have this weird feeling in you. And yes, this could happen. Secondly, I would like to talk about how people are going to school for education. So the fact that working with the same gender or working with not the same gender should get in the way, because yeah, like my PM said, you're going to school 5 days a week to study and to focus on your studies, and um, you're going to school for education. So gender should not get in the way. Gender should not be a problem for your education. And next, I would like to talk about how it's a safer place for both genders, and how yeah, like my PM say, the society is patriarchal, and how people are protesting for gender equality and feminism and stuff like that. And in co-ed school, you could see that, you could see equality in genders. And yeah, this brings courage to them because of the competition they have with other genders in co-ed school. And um, another thing I would like to say is how they aren't prepared for the future, or aren't prepared to the open world, the world out there, because of, yeah, like I said, there's no exposure to communicating with different gender. There's no exposure to working with different gender. And yeah, this brings more courage in them. This brings more motivation in them. And like I said, in this way they would have narrow thinking. And yeah, so in our world, you could see that genders would be more exposed and more exposed to the world, and they would have and they would, yeah, they would think openly and not yeah, think openly and would be open with everyone. And um yeah, and like I said, this going to school is for education, and gender should not get in the way. And like the example I gave, like working in a team, this makes them know, this makes them this brings exposure in them, and they would yeah, have more knowledge on how working with other gender is like. And in that case, I would like to end my speech. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the fine speech. Now, let's continue. Deputy Leader of Opposition, here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. I would prefer my POIs either verbally unmuting yourself. Oh, sorry. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Tan Ziling. I will be the Deputy Leader of Opposition. My preferred gender pronouns are she, her. Preferred method of POIs are verbally unmuting yourself, or you can just indicate that you would like to offer a POI in the chat. And I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Not only has Thai governments failed to provide to a structural analysis as how they offer a counter-narrative for young and impressionable girls that strive to flourish in the workforce, but second, they also failed to tell us the specific distinction between working with a woman or working with this person of the same gender and working with someone of the different gender, right? That is the crux of Deputy Prime Minister's case, which is the importance of being exposed to individuals that are of the different gender. So there's a few problems with that, right? First, we are unclear as to what is the crucial difference with working with men, women, and other individuals who identify as non-binary, etc. Second, even if they are only comfortable working in women-only spaces, we think that is still comparatively better if they are able to contribute in the workforce while simultaneously knowing their self-worth and being more confident. Things that single-sex schools exclusively provide, right? But second, we think it's untrue anyways, that fact that just because you go to a single-sex school, it necessarily means that you live in a bubble and you're unable to be exposed to people outside of your school. We think this is not true for a variety of factors. First, you go to tuition, you can have extracurricular activities, but just accessible fact that social media is extremely prevalent means that you are able to be exposed to individuals outside of your school, outside of your current local community, which means that you have the which means you necessarily have the acknowledgement that there are people that are different than you in the real world. Like, but let's look at their best case scenario where their individuals or young girls necessarily are comfortable working with the other gender simply because they go to a co-ed school. We need to look at the next threshold, which is, are these young girls able to become a confident leader, and are they able to assert some form of leadership role in that certain company, right? We think this is much better achieved on our side. Second, regarding PM's claim that individuals will have suicidal thoughts and depression, first, we think this is a stretch. Like, individuals aren't going to suddenly develop mental illnesses simply because they are surrounded by people, simply because they aren't exposed to the other gender. But we think this isn't mutually exclusive, right? The reason why students have these mental illnesses are due to things like peer pressure, things like stress over exams, being overworked by homework. We think this isn't mutually exclusive, but the comparative is still better on side of opposition because girls in single-sex schools are surrounded by individuals that can relate to you. They have similar life experiences. They can share their common experiences of being discriminated or being like catcalled on the street. All of these things means that young girls are more comfortable on our side because they have a school's worth of population that necessarily face similar life experiences with you. You are able to converse and communicate in a much more comfortable environment. The other extraneous responses will be integrated into my argument, right? So next, let's talk about the impact of young girls going to single-sex schools in the future. This argument is going to be divided into 3 layers. First, the importance of schools. Second, why necessarily having young girls in leadership roles is important, and how that carries into the real life workforce. And lastly, how this is also in the interest of the feminist movement in status quo. First, the importance of schools. I think it's worthy to note that schools act as a kind of mini simulation in the world when they grow older. So it is crucial that individuals hold positions and are active in extracurricular activities in their schools. But also, the experiences that you face when you are young often molds and shapes your identity and the value that you hold in the future. So, for example, young girls that grew up in a misogynistic household necessarily grow up to become the same misogynistic mothers that act unfair to their daughters compared to their sons. Or, for example, young and impressionable students hold their teachers' misogynistic teachings until they grow up. This is necessarily true because these individuals act as authoritative figures that creates a power asymmetry as to students feel that they should trust the people who are older than them simply because they are seen as authoritative figures, right? So that is why it's crucial that young girls hold leadership, on a balance, individuals holding young girls holding leadership positions are higher on our side, because even if the teachers are misogynistic in both worlds, in which government already conceded that society is to a certain extent misogynistic, then at least we are able to confirm that a girl will be holding a leadership position, right? Next, second layer. Why is it important that girls gain leadership positions, right? For a few reasons. From the get-go, the ability to represent your school, or the likelihood of for example, head prefect being a girl is just higher on our side. But second, the fact that you are able to participate in subjects that are necessarily male dominated in a sense. For example, like sports, for example, like STEM classes. All of these things society have a preconceived bias that males should be more active or better in these fields. Therefore, we think the comparative is better on our side because girls have a larger ability or a larger probability to be able to thrive in these classes simply because they have the opportunity, right? But third, it's things like learning leadership skills, responsibility, being confident in your ability as a student, being competent, all of these things mentioned by my prime minister, by my leader of opposition, went unresponded. So, but even if individuals don't don't necessarily become head prefect, I think it's also important that you see people like you get representation. So even if I don't get the position, at least someone that looks like me and looks like me and is necessarily holding these powers. Lastly, why is it important for the feminist movement? The feminist movement needs more strong individuals, especially women, to hold positions in power in society. This is because they act as role models to the next generation. With that, I end my speech.
All right, thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now, let's invite the government whip here.
Okay, my name's Avish. I'm the government whip. My preferred pronouns are he, him. If you have any POIs, just unmute yourself and yeah, just unmute yourself. Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, panel. I want to see that. Let's look at opposition's case. They say that was it these like parents and teachers have like an unconscious bias and like a sexist mindset on like prioritizing boys, right? They took the worst like amount of parents, right? Like the people who think like this, like a small minority of these people, and say that these are all everyone. They characterize everyone as these people. And like they talked about like how in our world we don't like eliminate any gender bias, but as I said before, like my deputy prime minister has also talked about like how they eliminate gender biases by like having programs and everything, like how working together with other people and everything, like in groups and everything. And also that they also talked about like how basically single sex schools will see women like more empowered and everything, but they didn't tell us how. They just gave us like that. And same thing is like how it allows empowerment. It's just like they hold positions and everything. Okay. And basically, they say that girls going to co-ed schools and like the teachers will like prioritize men. Like as I said before, they just took a small minority of teachers like in like developing countries and everything that sees that these men are better and everything. Like these people will basically who think like men are better. Like I said, it's just like a really small people. Like in today's world, it will not happen. Like they also say like how like the position in power is like male dominated in today's society, but we can see that this is already like changing even without like single sex schools. We can look at like Canada, where we can see like half of their cabinet is made like half of women and everything. Like you can see that feminist motion is already like been doing this even without single sex school.
POI.
Like, no, we can also see that like in single sex schools, they are like taking empowered roles and everything. Like they have the mindset, but it's not exclusive to their world. Like we'll say that it's better in our world because we see like in our world there are more competition. Like it mimics the real world right now. Basically, it mimics the real world because in the real world, right? It's not like you're going to be segregated into like women only like workforces and everything. You'll have to work together with other genders. So saying basically in our world there are more competition and it mimics the real world. So like they have to work harder. So even if like they get these empowered roles, right, it'll be better for the feminist movement because it shows that these women are capable of taking these empowered roles. They also say that our best case scenario is like how all of these women will they say about like our best case scenario is like if all these women are comfortable in our school, like how like all these like young girls will become a leader and says like it's more prominent in their world, but we say that this is untrue because let's just look at our world right now. Is that we see that if we make like all these women go to co-ed schools, like there'll be like more competition, right? We can see that this like I said, it mimics the real world. So like these people are like more like basically more well prepared, and when they go to the real world, it's like it'll be better for them. Like they have a better chance of becoming a leader because they have to like put up with all these competitions to achieve empowered role. And they also show that like they also say that like how young girls like going into like basically like grew up in a misogynistic household, like basically people who like prioritize men and everything, and like basically like they say about how these young girls who like grow up in these households, right? They will go up to their like mothers who think that men are better and everything, but they didn't talk about how it would happen. Like it wouldn't happen on their side. They just said that it would happen on our side. So it's not exclusive to only our world. We can show that, like as I say about competitiveness, which is like I want to talk about, which is competitiveness. It's like it's like Anna said, like why is it important for like they also talk about like why is it important for girls to hold position, and I said in our world it is actually better because these women can hold better positions, and like basically there are more competition, so basically like people will think that they work hard for these roles as compared to like basically that's about it. Basically if like by abolishing these single sex schools, right, we can see that it's actually better for the feminist motions because, like I say about competitiveness and everything, you can see that these women like strive to like become better and like they're basically better than like how do you say this? They just show to be like they worked hard for their position. Like let's just look at our case right now. Like we talked about like how like no with the abolishment of like single sex schools, we get to remove gender stereotypes. Like as my PM has talked about, like right now with co-eds, like sorry, with single sex school, it promotes like gender stereotypes and everything. Like it promotes gender segregation is basically what we're saying. Like they're being exposed to like people of like the same gender, which basically like which actually brings more harm and disadvantage to like these people. And like basically let's just like we are looking at like as like their lives for like the short term and long term. Like as I say about the real world, like how they have to mingle around, right? By like exposing them to one another and then thinking that basically these people have like a mindset that basically that they're entitled to something just because they're a woman, which is basically really wrong, which is like morally wrong. Just because like you were born into a gender doesn't mean you're supposed to like deserve more rights as another. Like that's like as the feminism movement I showed is that equal rights for everyone. And like basically in our world, like in our best case, we see that females like we say about like how basically this will help the feminist movement and everything. Like it will show that females be more empowered in basically in that's about it. Thank you for thank you.
All right. Thank you, Government Whip. Now let's have the opposition whip here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, my name is Arshini. I will be the government whip. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and my preferred method of POIs is just verbally unmuting yourself. Just give me a second to set up my timer. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, what the government side of today's debate has completely misunderstood is the general goal of the feminist movement. So let me repeat what the feminist movement is about. It's about creating equality for girls by empowering them in situations of discrimination and when they are at a disadvantage compared to boys. So here's how my debate speech is going to go. First, I'm going to state some general rebuttals that don't fit in with the rest of my substantive. Then I'm going to provide a general summary of what government's world and opposition's world looks like. And then I will be presenting the main clash of today's debate and why I believe opposition has won this debate. So first of all, general rebuttals. First thing is that I think that came out in Prime Minister's speech, they said that people will compete with each other more. First of all, this is not mutually exclusive because in their world, people will still deal with peer pressure and things like that. People will still compete with each other. In fact, in co-ed schools, because there is a smaller amount of people of the same gender, competition is likely more ingrained into them. For example, we can see, if there is a position, for example, if there are girls competing with each other to maybe have a specific position in school or something like that, there's probably going to be more competition considering the fact that there is a smaller amount of people in co-ed schools as compared to our schools. And those positions that exist for women itself is scarce in co-ed due to unconscious bias. Another thing that came out in WIP's speech, I think, is that they said that we characterize a small minority of sexist teachers and parents as everyone, as every single teacher and parent. We never said that. We said that there is quite a large number of people that have these unconscious biases that boys are stronger or boys are more capable of holding positions of leadership, that it is strong enough and a large enough number of people to deliver an impact to girls that study in co-ed schools. If we were focusing on the people that aren't sexist, then there is no point to this debate, because it is as the feminist movement whose goal is to create equality in situations of unfairness towards girls. So if there's no unfairness in the first place, this debate wouldn't be happening at all. They also said, I think WIP said, that girls will believe that they only obtain things because they're girls. First, we find this extremely an unfair characterization, because at the end of the day, when those girls become, for example, the head prefect or the monitor of the class, they still need to work to get those things among their communities of girls in single-sex schools, right? Because at the end of the day, they still need to be hardworking, they still need to be smart, they still need to do things to obtain those roles. So believing that girls are going to feel entitled to just get positions because of the girls, especially considering the fact that we live in a patriarchal society as it is today, is extremely unfair and unrealistic. Another thing that they talked about was how working with different genders causes open-minded thinking and communication causes equality, which was not explained by the Deputy Prime Minister at all. It was just a one-liner. So first we find out that, and they said that this communication can occur more in government's role. First of all, we find this unlikely because we can still see separation in schools based off of gender in co-ed schools. For example, there are a lot of people tend to gravitate towards the same gender, girls with girls, boys with girls in co-ed schools. Obviously, there are going to still be people who interact with opposite genders in co-ed schools, but that is a pretty small amount of interaction in the grand scheme of things. And it's something we're still able to, that was something that we're able to trade off, considering the fact that we're still able to get that amount of interaction in our world, because people will react with opposite genders in tuition centers, with family members and things like that. And this small amount of interaction obtained on their world is not enough to deliver as dramatic of an effect that government tries to propagate. So moving on to the general summary of what the worlds look like. So the world presented by government is in their best case scenario, which is fairly idealistic, where they talk about how people will interact with each other, they'll be able to understand each other's perspectives through things like group work and things like that. First of all, like we said, this is not mutually exclusive, it exists in our world as well. But okay, fine, even if it does exist in their world, we don't necessarily see how that is in the best interest of the feminist movement and how exactly that serves the purpose of what the feminist movement is trying to achieve. So we don't necessarily see how that's relevant to the debate in the first place. And in their worst case scenario, which is the more likely scenario of unconscious biases still existing in people's minds, like the stereotype that girls are too emotional to hold positions of leadership and those roles should just go to boys and things like that. In that worst case scenario, girls do not even have the chance to be able to see what they could achieve and what they have the potential to do in those positions of leadership, because they're kind of shunned in this possible worst case scenario, right? Whereas what does opposition's world look like? In our best case scenario, girls are able to get the experience in positions of power from a young age, or at least even if they don't manage to get that head prefect spot or get that monitor spot, they're at least able to experience a world or a scenario where they are not rejected solely on the basis of the fact that they are girls and people believe that girls are too emotional and things like that. And in the long run, as my deputy leader of opposition said, when girls go out after they graduate school and they start looking for jobs and things like that, they're able to carry themselves with the confidence that they obtained in the school, that they obtained during their school levels in the single-sex schools, of being empowered and being able to have that experience to get better roles out there, right? And like my DLO said, it's a cycle, and when there are more women in power, that then inspires more younger girls to achieve a thing, and it just continues. Whereas in our worst case scenarios, even in the situation where students interact less with the opposite gender and they're unable to somehow quote unquote deal with the real world as stated by the Deputy Prime Minister, while their experience in school for things like leadership and such are limited to just among girls, they will still have more experience comparatively to the government side, where they're more likely unable to get as many roles as compared to in single-sex schools, because in single-sex schools they have to pick girls and they're able to achieve more experience and equality, right? So the main clash debate is which side serves the purpose of the feminist movement more. To remind you, the purpose of the feminist movement is to create equality for girls, by empowering them in situations of discrimination and unfairness. Whereas, this is why opposition side takes the cake, because we acknowledge that patriarchy and misogyny. While we acknowledge that patriarchy and misogyny still exists outside of the school in the real world, we're not saying that when girls obtain more chances to hold positions of leadership in single-sex school, that this is the real world. It's just this is what the real world could be if more girls were able to have that experience of going out and getting that leadership and getting that experience of being those positions of power, comparatively to government roles where they're more likely unable to attain that. So if you want a side that protects the feminist movement more and serves the ideals more and allows girls to achieve their full potential, please vote for side opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition whip. Now to wrap up the case from the opposition bench, opposition reply. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Visibility is important for representation. That is why we told you when the probability of getting a young girl in a leadership role is at the best case 50% on government versus 100% of the time on opposition side, we say that in of itself is already important for these young impressionable girls to grow up with the confidence and belief that they're able to achieve and flourish in the workforce as well. First, what is the incentive of the feminist movement? Because note that not only that Prime Minister failed to clarify to us what the incentives of the feminist movements are, but also they wholeheartedly agree to the fact that society is currently misogynistic. Therefore, implicitly conceding to the fact that we need a counter narrative, especially in industries like STEM or sport, where there is still a bias towards the ability of women in those certain fields. We think that it is important for young girls to have a sense of confidence in their abilities when they're able to see individuals like them holding leadership positions in schools. 2 things in my speech. First, exposure, next competition. First, exposure. Let's take note of the fact that government failed to explain why it is so crucial that young girls have to necessarily work with the other gender to attain or to increase the likelihood of success, right? Why is it so important for me as an individual to work with boys as opposed to working with girls? We aren't clear of the actual value of that analysis. But second, the more important thing is, what roles do girls play when they are working these assignments, when they are engaging in students in the classroom? We told you a few things. We told you that in the opposition side, it is crucial and is certain that a girl will end up taking the leadership role. They'll have a higher likelihood of girls being more comfortable to speak up because there is a visibility of someone that looks like me and acts like me, and like I can see myself through that person attaining success, of being head prefect, of being thriving in the STEM courses. All of these things are important for schools to establish from a young age in order for these girls to carry this sort of mentality forward when they grow up, when they enter the work field, etc., etc. Next, let's talk about jobs. Because government told us that if girls are more confident working with guys, working with men, then they're able to excel in these jobs. First, we're unclear because they lack the structural analysis to prove why girls that on a comparative are less likely to hold leadership positions like being monitor, being prefects on their role, necessarily have the confidence and know their self-worth. But we told you, we took their best case scenario and tell you, even if girls on opposition side are only comfortable working with women, we're fine with that, because at the end of the day, they are able to know their worth and they are able to see and acknowledge the fact that they aren't inferior to to men. They have equal worth in a misogynistic society. Lastly, competition. We told you this isn't mutually exclusive, especially in WIP. We told you when when you get into a leadership position, you still need to put in equal amount of work and effort, but the result of the competition is what's crucial here. If on our side we've proved that a girl is always going to win in any sort of election, for example, like choosing class monitor, etc., that is the side that is much more preferable. That's why side opposition won. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your speech. Now to wrap up the debate, I'd like to invite the government reply here.
All right, am I audible?
Here you are.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side opposition has told us that how the inability of female students to get these male-dominated roles like class monitor. They also told us that they in co-ed schools it's going to get worse because sometimes in our school they don't they said that we did not give them a characterization as of how exactly we're going to help these students build confidence. But we're going to do this because as I mentioned in my PM speech earlier, as they learn to actually respect and communicate each other at a young age, because of course this is a school, so it's going to be at a, whether they're in elementary school or whether it's a secondary school, they're going to need to have to communicate with each other whether they like it or not. And this is why they're going to soon learn how to respect each other and communicate with each other, and thus it creates more understanding. At the same time, they also become more confident with their views and more confident with what they have to say because of this understanding and because of the skill of being able to communicate with each other. Now, other than that, side opposition told us that there are unconscious biases in our world, and they also said that in our world these females are less likely going to be empowered, which is like counterproductive in the first place because of feminism. However, we see that this is untrue because in the first place, now that these students have to mix around with each other and have to accept each other's views and opinions, as I mentioned earlier, they'll be more confident and it builds the courage for them. So now this leads to empowerment. An example that, a common example that I can give you is how in a co-ed school, we have recently seen the Make School a Safer Place movement started by a 17-year-old student, and how that we've seen that there are problems happening in co-ed schools, like safety problems. However, it is we on side governments say that now that these things are actually happening in the co-ed schools, people are actually coming up and speaking about these issues. And as we all know, that is true because we see that Make School a Safer Place movement is now known worldwide, and in many countries are giving this movement a lot of support as well. So other than that, my whip has clarified on how exactly segregation will make these people be basically it promotes inequality. As we mentioned earlier, the stereotype and bias of being around people of the same gender for 5 days a week for many hours, because you're constantly going to be wanting, or you're constantly going to be comparing yourself to the other people around you, and we see that this is going to lead to peer pressure, and that we do see peer pressure happening a lot, going to be happening a lot more in opposition side. Although it does happen in government side, we see it going to happen a lot more in opposition side because they are surrounded by the same gender. And other than that, my whip also clarified how boys and girls are going to be sort of divided in the way that they're not going to be forming proper friendships with each other, and that we see that this is bad. And the alternative that opposition has given is that there are other ways through social media, through like tuition classes and like family members. But here inside government, we see that not everybody has the privilege of going to tuition, and not everybody has the privilege of having a social media, or male people, male siblings, or family members or relatives in their family, which is why on-site government, we have told you that gender stereotyping and gender discrimination is more likely going to operate in opposition's world, and that in our world they're going to be more empowered, and they're also going to be more likely to succeed in the long run. So with that being said, never been prouder to oppose.
All right. Thank you everyone for the debate. You may virtually cross the floor and shake hands. And also you may leave the call as we will announce the result in the main call. Thank you.
Thanks for the debate.